Masada is this amazing and ambitious space RTS that is designed as a sandbox game with a persistent fleet instead of a string of missions, and its dev just showed us a lot of new footage specifically about combat. He also announced plans for a free playtest and demo, and I will explain about that and all the other features of this sole indie developed project in this video, but first let's take a look and talk about this newest footage. Just like you would expect from a Homeworld inspired game, all contacts with other ships start on the sensor map, but ships can be outside your visual range and still in your sensor range, meaning that only once your scouts are close enough you can click on enemy ships and inspect their components and even crew level to learn about their threat level. Undocking fighters from a support frigate already puts this game in development ahead of many released games, but that is just one in a sea of fantastic features being developed for Masada. In this initial combat engagement between fighters, we can actually notice some important gameplay aspects. First of all, the ships can fire their weapons independently of their current facing, meaning their weapon points aren't fixed and can rotate like turrets. Second, ships have inventories and components like the capacitor, which has a limited capacity of energy from which it can regenerate the ship's shields during combat. Third is the fact that selected ships can be organized in formations, and you can actually see multiple such possible formations in the bottom of the UI. On the leftmost side of the UI, you can see 3 separate behavior control settings, each with a subset of possible settings. These control combat tactics like strike run, brawl or keep at range, the stance of ships, and what kind of focus on enemy subsystems they should have in combat. The combinations of these settings produce the space dogfight choreography, which is one of the most awesome sights to behold in such a game, and what made Homeworld itself feel so epic to watch. True enough, such space combat choreography might not feel very grounded in reality of spaceship combat, but if these kinds of games went with total realism, they would be far less enjoyable to watch and play. Anyway, all of this is still in early development, so there is lots of room for improvement, and as the dev himself said, if you see anything strange going on with these formations, it is to be expected at this stage. Because of the many different weapon systems on bigger ship classes, the counterplay remains the same. Fighters can't be effectively targeted by frigates' big guns, and they take a long time to whittle down the frigate's high HP. They can also orbit large ships and even fly faster than the large ship's guns can turn. But what is extremely important is that ships have already been programmed to be able to engage any target at any time, so even while attacking a frigate, your fighters will still turn their turrets on enemy fighters if they cross paths. There is, however, a way in Masada to improve a large ship's chances against fast and agile small ships. These are items like targeting neural links, which can be installed and moved from ship storage to its component slots mid-battle. This kind of ship customization is certainly next level for an RTS game of this scale. I remember enjoying the Star Wolves game series a lot exactly for this amazing ship and module customization, but that was a game with a single mothership and just a half a dozen controllable ships. Having customization in a game with entire fleets is going to be very interesting, and I wonder how this will impact the gameplay flow and micromanagement during big fleet versus fleet engagements. Another interesting feature is support ships, which actively regenerate shields of allies mid-fight. Ships can be equipped with modules to repair each other or prevent enemies from using cruise drives and escaping from combat. These modules become potential loot that remains after ships are destroyed and can be picked up and used by other ships. Other ships' wreckage can be mined or stay in one piece if it is a turret, for example. One of the coolest other new clips the dev has made was one that showed the comparison of ships according to their size. You really don't get a better way to appreciate the size of space objects than when you start to compare them to each other. Dev has created scouts which are tiny, but as we go from interceptors, bombers, gunships and corvettes to frigates, carriers, destroyers, and ultimately battleships, we can start to appreciate the true scale of this future game. Since combat is one of the main elements for playing a game like Masada, but trade is also possible, and I will talk about that a bit later in the video, let's now cover more info on battles and tactics. First of all, you can get into free-for-alls in Masada, or get ganged up by several factions you have anchored. You might have an ally faction come to help you, meaning that besides 1v1 fights, you might end up in 1v2v2 fights or some other permutation. But combat is just a subset of commands you have to be able to give to ships acting as a fleet. There are other commands like docking, repair and refueling, depending on the available ships. Formations are a core principle for this dev in making Masada. Being able to use them gives a lot of potential benefits like improved line of sight, avoiding friendly fire, being able to focus on enemies, and of course automatically distributing ships across the fleet in a way that protects those that don't have many combat options, while most combat capable ships fly as outriders. These formations will be dynamic, but we have to wait a bit longer to see exactly how that will function when combined with multiple ship classes. This is where having tactical pause in the game will help to be able to take advantage of all those extra options and features. So while the game is real time, you can give orders during pause and get the benefits from using advanced commands. The second feature that will be of great help in organizing your fleet and watching out for enemies or opportunities on the vast map is the sensor mode. Players of Homeworld will be quite familiar with this system, and it seems to work very similar in Masada as well. Moving ships in 3 dimensions, going up and down, over and under. But there is also going to be a flat 2D map which will show you the separate map regions, important ships or space station locations. What I found especially interesting is that instead of ships gaining veterancy, their crew will gain bonuses. So as they gain experience in their roles, they give buffs to their ships. For example, an interceptor will gain increased damage and speed from a veteran crew, while a carrier would become faster at repairing or building new ships. So the longer you keep your ship in one piece and its crew alive, the better that ship gets at its main role. And mentioning ship production, a feature I didn't expect but am now highly interested in is being able to configure ship turrets and modules in a sort of ship designer. Meaning you don't just produce ships and weapon configurations that are preset in the game, but can make your own adjustments to their turrets and modules. And in Masada, such turrets and modules are independent of the ship's hull, meaning you can target and destroy them individually during ship combat. One important difference in ships and battles between Homeworld and Masada are shields. While Homeworld had very complicated systems of turning on shields of sorts from specialized ships, in Masada ships come with their own shields. These shields will get better effects as development continues. Other main parts of ships are their hull and armor, as well as subsystems. Subsystem targeting is very much a feature of this game, and it will include hitting turrets as mentioned previously. These subsystems can be divided into external and internal, which are further divided into turrets, engines and sensors for the external, and core, cargo and modules for the internal ones. As mentioned in the intro, news on a demo version is that it's gotten very close, but because the dev doesn't want to give a date and end up missing it, he hasn't announced one yet. So be sure to keep an eye on my RTS news, as I hope to announce the demo's release in one of the next ones. What is important is that Masada has been rebuilt from scratch because of the transition from an object-oriented actor-based approach to pure data-driven. What that change meant for the game was that it now runs orders of magnitude faster in terms of CPU processing and can simulate tens of thousands of ships. You might ask then, okay, so are we going to get tens of thousands of ships in Masada? And how are they going to fit onto the map? And how does one even control so many ships? All of those are valid questions, so let's take them one at a time. First of all, just because the game can handle that many ships, it doesn't mean the gameplay will support them. This is something the dev himself is working out, as he doesn't like the idea of arbitrary limits but imposing them through gameplay itself. For example, as each ship uses fuel to travel, and the entire game is played on a single massive 50 square kilometers map, you can have hundreds or thousands of ships, but you might never have the necessary logistics to be able to refuel all of them and be able to move your fleet. And when it comes to fuel, I found a few more interesting facts. So in order to travel large distances, frigates and larger ships have something called cruise mode. Since this is exclusive to large ships, before turning it on you have to dock all your smaller craft like fighters and corvettes into your carriers. In that type of flight mode, large ships burn a lot more fuel than in regular flight mode, but travel very fast in a straight line. Perfect for crossing vast distances on this massive map. If you're thinking why no faster than light or FTL for short, the dev stated that he doesn't plan to have it in the game, unless he decides to put it in only for the very late game, if even for that. And because the weight of ships affects both maneuverability and fuel usage, you quickly start to realize that you won't be just mass-producing ships and creating fleets made up of thousands of battlecruisers, as the in-game systems and resources required to operate those ships put a logical and logistical limit on such plans. To me, this is simply smart game design, as players don't start to hit artificial limits and blame the game's design or the designer for being uncomfortable with such artificial limits, but simply hit a natural game limit set by the game mechanics. Sure, some might say that having fuel in space games with massive fleets is an outdated idea, but it made a huge difference in gameplay between Homeworld 1 and 2. It adds tactical depth, as you have to consider whether you will be able to bring your logistics close enough to the fight to keep it going. You had to worry about protecting your logistics while at the same time preparing a strike against the enemy logistics and crippling their attack force. Feel free to tell me in the comments, do you think having fuel is a bad or a good idea? Another important thing about the ships and their movement I have to tell you about is that the system 2 was recently redone. The dev was getting annoyed at his first and basic movement system that used a lot of tricks to create mostly good looking but ultimately fake movement of ships across all classes. Its shortcomings were starting to become very obvious as the navigation tactics required for good looking space combat started to become implemented, so he remade the system, which is why it's now based on proper physics. What this means is that all ships in Masada now have actual mass. Thrusters create forces on that mass and have to push against the ship's inertia. This directly made heavy capital ships, for example, naturally feel sluggish to move while making small fighters as nimble as they are supposed to be. It's probably similar to what the dev of Ephemeris made for his own real-time tactical battles. In case you never watched my videos on that game, here is one of the most recent ones up here and down in the description. Anyway, we now know more about the map, ship movements and logistics, but before I move on to other topics, just another note on the logistics themselves. Since Masada is a ship-only game, there will be no stations for the player to construct, as much as fans of the X games might be disappointed by that fact. Meaning that to store more resources and supplies, you have to build and use additional freighters. You probably already realize how that puts your supplies at risk from enemy raids. But on the other hand, this facilitates trade, meaning that you can turn your fleet from a hunter-killer into a space caravan, becoming basically pure industrialists and just build stuff to sell and trade between NPC stations. And you will see such trade fleets managed by NPCs in the game. But of course you will still need protection from enemies who want to raid your goods, as different map regions will have different danger ratings and prices will vary accordingly. This is why you can see that ships have inventories which are organized by grid or list, and each ship has its specific inventory size. The current economy and one we might find in the demo is static, but the full game is planned to have a dynamic economy system across its massive map, meaning that it will have its own ebb and flow like real markets. I hope this last part makes fans of the X games a bit more interested. Some of you might wonder about the difficulty scaling after I mentioned Homeworld, and you can take a breath now as the dev confirmed he won't be putting in any difficulty scaling in his game. But what he does plan on adding is an Iron Man mode which would prevent saves coming. The lose condition in this game is losing all your ships. My guess is that doesn't mean every single scout, but more important ships and ones that can produce other ships. For those of you who wonder about modding, as this game is built on the Unreal Engine, there are plans for modding it. But as you can imagine or know already from other Unreal games, that is problematic as it requires creating a custom modding system. Nonetheless, the dev wants to have very open modding because the game is sandbox in nature, and that leaves a lot of room for possible new gameplay ideas, meaning creative mods. Since I can anticipate your next question to be how exactly does the game play in a sandbox mode, let's talk a bit about that aspect. From what I can understand, the dev has a plan to respect each player's freedom and doesn't want to have old school mission objectives for us, but rather set up a story arc which is being planned currently. The story isn't going to be set up for us just to follow along, but open-ended, giving no map markers and no UI mission tracking, nothing generic or fetch-like. This will happen across the map and feel organic, like stumbling upon a convoy that has intel of a base or trade caravan that might be attacked or raided. If this ends up triggering an event for us as the player, you can choose to engage with it or continue on your way without getting involved. Dev's main focus is to keep it as free of gaming and hand-holding elements and give you more freedom and get you into the similar mindset like when you're playing something like Elden Ring. And yes, that does mean you can find legendary world bosses to defeat on the map. I remember talking a bit about the resource systems of Masada in my previous videos, but let's expand on that too. So you begin your hunt for resources by flying around the map. Once you locate asteroids rich in minerals, you first mine for their ore, then you refine it into materials on your ships and directly use it to produce ships, modules and turrets. It might get a bit more complicated than that in the future versions of the game, but for now it's quite simple and straightforward. Personally, I hope the dev keeps it that way. You can tell me what you think in the comments below. Anyway, different ores are refined into various mineral combinations, and then of course there is a hierarchy of rarity and value of these. Since both you and other NPCs will be targeting these asteroids for mineral extraction, they will be exhausted and you will be forced to keep moving. Different regions of the map will have different asteroid sizes and different spawn rates, but a sort of regeneration system will be implemented. I am not sure how I feel about asteroids respawning, even if it could be made a lore thing, like getting better sensor resolution so you can detect minerals on asteroids you at first think are bare. I think it would be better for ships to be recyclable so you can get resources from damaged or captured ships, or that as you improve your extraction and refining systems you can get resources from asteroids you couldn't harvest at the start of the game. Anything but just spawning in matter where there was none before. It is a space sci-fi game after all, not fantasy. As for other current plans, I can tell you that the developer doesn't have a publisher, but they are searching for one. So for now, you can help them by wishlisting the game on Steam and also by joining their Discord, link to which is in the description of this video, and sharing your ideas and feedback with them. There you can find more art and clips of the game as well as keep up with the latest info. I hope you liked what you saw so far of Masada, and I will show you more in future videos. But until then, check out some of my other videos shown here as cards or linked in the description. Thank you for watching and happy gaming!